Welcome back to Your Story Medicine. Today, I am with the amazing Leslie Priscilla, who, first of all, is a proud mother to three beautiful biracial children. And she is an incredible parent coach who has over 14 years of experience facilitating this transformation. Leslie shares her medicine by offering coaching, workshops, support, and advocacy for Latinx and Chicanx families locally, nationally, and internationally through her platform, Latinx Parenting. And if you don't know about her Instagram page, then please go and check it out. You will find so much medicine through her posts, through her memes, and most especially her reels that have been bringing me so much joy. I'm like, okay, when I become a parent, if I ever become a parent, like your Instagram page is going to be my parenting 101. But her vision is a movement that is rooted in children's rights, social and racial justice, the individual and collective practice of nonviolence and reparenting, intergenerational and ancestral healing, cultural sustenance, and the active decolonization of oppressive practices in our families toward liberation. Another plug-in, Leslie is also an alumni of Your Story Medicine, and now I get to proudly call her an accomplice and a comrade on this journey of not only decolonizing entrepreneurship, but just decolonizing the ways that we are showing up in general. So welcome, Leslie. So happy to have you here today to share your story with us.
Oh, I'm with my teacher today. I'm so happy to be here with you, June. I love it. I love you.
I love you too. Okay, so let's go back to what it was like back in the day when I would ask the question of what is it that you're celebrating about yourself?
I have so many things to celebrate. I think constantly I'm looking at how temporary everything is and looking back at the journey of becoming an entrepreneur, of, getting to know so many families along the way who shared their stories with me, right? I feel like that's part of why I am in this position, is because I was just transformed by their stories. So I celebrate the fact that we are able to reflect on our stories, the fact that, I'm here to hold space. We were just talking a little bit before that, I'm here to be a channel. Like, I'm here to hold space for Latinx families specifically. And, I celebrate our vision, the vision that we share about liberation. Wait, can I redo that? Are you going to edit?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we're fine. Go ahead.
Okay, that was just a warm up. It was a warm up.
Do you want me to ask a question? Do you want me to ask a question again?
Yeah, ask the question again. Sorry, I got lost, and I was like, "There's so much to celebrate." Anyway,
this is what happens. Please. This is what happens when you have two manifestors and
I know
ADHDers together. Okay, edit. Okay. So let's go back to what it was like back in the day when I would ask the question of what is it that you're celebrating about yourself today?
I am celebrating, honestly, just being here with you today. That's what I'm celebrating. I love being in connection with people like you who have these shared visions for what our communities can look like, and that are doing it in such creative and such heart-centered ways. And I just celebrate being alive for this experience. It's just, an honor to be here.
I want to take a moment to celebrate you too, Leslie, because I remember when we first started working together. First of all, I'm not going to lie, I was intimidated because I'm like, oh my gosh, Latinx Parenting wants to work with me. At that time, you had 20,000 followers. And I was like, okay, she must be like a celebrity or something. However, there was no face. There was no face to the page. It was just Latinx Parenting. And so to get to know you on this journey really humbled me in realizing that behind the number of followers we have is still a person that has humongous dreams and is it still goes through the fear, the questioning, the self-doubt. And so it was so beautiful to be able to witness you blossom into embodying Latinx parenting, which is why I'm like, wow, to see your reels, to see you enjoy sharing this medicine is like a celebration of even like the both of us and how far we've come, because like I'm genuinely on this journey with you, right? I'm like, let me do the thing it is that I'm afraid of, which is putting myself out there and calling forth other women of color who are also wanting to do this healing work, but no longer martyr ourselves for the sake of the movement.
Yes, 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 yes to all of that. I think you were such a necessary gift during that time in my life, because at the time I had a co-founder. And one of the things that I realized actually by working with you was that a lot of times we do things like get a co-founder or, have somebody else like validate what we're doing because we feel insecure about really stepping into our medicine, right? And so what happened was that during our time together, she ended up, removing herself from the organization. Still so appreciate all the foundation that she laid, still hold a lot of love in my heart for her. And what happened when she left was amazing, because everything opened up, and just as everything was closing down, because this was like COVID times too, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, it really opened up like, okay, I can do this on my own, and I would not have gotten there if I didn't have you specifically saying that to me, right? And it wasn't anything that I didn't know like really, really deep down, but I really had to have the experience of working with you and being in that space to be able to excavate that truth out of myself. And so when I kind of stepped into it and got very clear on what my medicine was, that is when I feel like the community started to resonate that much more, right? So I had already built this platform. You're right, there was no face, right? I was kind of afraid to kind of step out there. I didn't want to like outshine my co-founder at the time. There were like so many reasons. And at the same time, once she left, I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm not, I'm not going to stay in the shadows anymore. I have a message to share. I have a movement to begin. And very soon after that, I started the End Chancla Culture hashtag, which honestly has become a movement, and people are taking it upon themselves to end Chancla culture in their homes. Which is to say, they're ending violence in their homes in all the ways. And so that's what I celebrate on the greater scale, is that people are doing this in their homes, right? It's like, I can only hold your hand. And I'm sure that you relate to this. Like, I can only hold your hand so much when I'm in that shared space with you, but then everything else is you.
Yeah, it's been so wild to see this movement take off,
Yeah.
because I mean, like, even for myself as a child of immigrant, the ways that I would be quote unquote disciplined was, for me, the weapon was the fly swatter.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
like
Oh my
each other
gosh.
immigrant, each immigrant family
Yeah.
has like their weapon of choice, and like granted, like
Yes.
thankfully it was not a common thing, and like the fly swatter was just like gentle enough to not leave a scar, but I remember like the indentations in my skin. I remember being in the households of some of my other friends where their parents' weapon of choice was a belt.
Yeah.
And and then I learned in like other cultures it's a sandal, a shoe. And it's like, where is any of this even learned from? And it begs the question of, does this actually help discipline children? Does it change their behaviors? Or
Yeah.
is it only perpetuating the very violence it is that we want to eliminate? And so,
Yeah,
you know what, like
absolutely.
before you answer that, let's actually talk about like, what is your ancestral lineage, and how
Yeah.
has this influenced the ways that you are showing up in Latinx parenting today?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I am of Mexican descent. So my mother was born in the northernmost state of Mexico in Chihuahua, and her lineage is actually Raramuri, also known as Tarahumara. And so these are the indigenous people of central Chihuahua. And my father was born in Colima, which is more south, and he's very much, a city boy. Like, they grew up very, very differently. They have not been able to tell me what my indigenous lineage is there. But I identify in many ways, right? So people see Latinx parenting. Yes, I identify as Latina. Sometimes I identify as a Mexicana. I identify as Mexican American. Like, there's so much fluidity, I think, with the way that we can identify. But I am now identifying also as a detribalized Indigenous person. And so it's taken me a lot of time to be able to feel like, yes, actually, I have the right to claim certain parts of my identity that were attempted to be erased by colonization. And I refuse, right? Like I really refuse to let those parts of my identity go, even if I'm not so intimately connected with it. But yeah, there's all kinds of ways to identify. I don't know, exactly where my ancestors are from. I think that's such a travesty for so many of us that we don't know exactly, what happened. And at the same time, I think that wanting to know what happened from a cognitive space will cause us suffering, as opposed to just like tuning back into our heart space and knowing that that is really where our ancestors live, right? Is in our bodies and in our hearts. And we can feel them when we let the sun shine on our face, and we can feel them when we put our feet in the ocean, and we can feel them when we cook the meals that they cooked for our parents when our parents were their grandchildren, right? And so there's frustration and grief around the not knowing, and also there's so much celebration in knowing that our ancestry is just sitting right here, right? Just in this chair.
Yeah, so beautiful. But how did your upbringing then lead to you taking a stance on ending the Chancla culture?
Yeah. So there's that like macro ancestry, and then there's like my ancestry, which are my parents, right? And so my parents were Mexican immigrants. I grew up very much immersed in Mexican culture. And when I looked around, even just in my own household and in my cousins' households, there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of struggle. Part of this was because, they came from Mexico. And so there's all kinds of stuff that happens when you're trying to assimilate and you're trying to enculturate. And at the same time, I saw the disconnection that a lot of that pain that they came with bred in us as children, right? So I saw it in my cousins. The outcomes for some of my cousins are really tragic. I have cousins who are houseless. I have cousins who, became parents very, very, very young. I have cousins who are incarcerated. Like this has been something that I've experienced that has been in my face my entire life. And so as I grew and as I became an adolescent, I was not connected with my mother at all, which was so sad, but also I couldn't, at the time it was really devastating, but now I understand that she wasn't even connected with herself. So it would have been impossible to connect with anybody else the way that I needed her to connect with me. And so while I never received the actual chancla, which I'll talk about later is more of like an emblem for all violence that we experience in our culture, I did get corporal punishment. I got a lot of what I call verbal and emotional chancletazos, which are shaming, threatening, yelling, right? Like all the things that shake the spirit, not necessarily the body physically, but they'll cause, what my maestros in curanderismo call susto, which is when the spirit like leaves the body, right? And so I had so many of those experiences growing up that it just fully disconnected me from my mom, like specifically. My dad was not around very much. My mom was a single mother for the majority of my childhood and adolescence. So he wasn't really, somebody that he was a parent, definitely, but my primary connection was to my mother, right? And so not having that connection at the level that I wanted it was really painful. When I became a parent, I was like, I don't know what the fuck to do. Like, I don't have any blueprints of positive parenting or gentle parenting or like ways to be with this child that are not violent. And so I started therapy. Like I had been in therapy on and off since I was 9 years old, actually, but I was pregnant and I was like, I'm freaking out, man. I was like, I'm freaking out. I'm 23 years old and I have a baby growing in me. And I just left I literally just moved in with my boyfriend. And at the time, we're pregnant now, but I just left my mom's house. And not even a year ago, I was like, pulling my hair out because it was just such an awful experience to be in the same house with her when she was experiencing all of the depression and anger issues and all these things. So it was traumatizing. And so I went back into therapy, and that was really important for me and for my partnership. And I started slowly to reflect and slowly to recognize what some of the things I wanted to change were for her, for me. And it really was the moment that she was born. And I looked at her and I was like, oh my God, this is me, right? Like this child has everything that I still have in me. This child is innocent. This child is sacred. This child deserves safety, protection, unconditional love. I cannot imagine harming this child ever, or any harm coming to this child ever, right? And it really was like all of that happened in that 1 second where I first saw her. And then she started growing. She's 10 years old now, and it's so much harder, right? When I look around at what's available for parents who have brown or Black skin, you will find it very difficult to find parenting experiences reflected that match those of our families. And so while I was exposing myself to gentle parenting and like reading all these books by white people, I was like, this sounds really great, but I do not see my experience reflected here. This is super whitewashed. And what I learned, right, and just wanting to learn it, right, and setting the intention to learn it, is that the practices of gentle parenting were actually stolen from us when they replaced them with oppressive parenting practices when they attempted to, colonize and kill all of us 500 years ago. And so it's another thing that's actually been appropriated, which happens so often, right? This gentle parenting actually does not belong just to white folks. And if you understand the history of where it comes from our parents wanting to protect us, wanting to keep us safe, and not really knowing how else to do it because this has been passed down for so many generations.
I need to call myself forth when I reflect on the dynamics between me and my own parents. As a teenager, probably a lot like you, I was really rebellious, like to sneak out of the house, and also like kind of took advantage of the fact that my parents didn't completely know the culture here in the United States, and the ways that I would like the arguments between, most especially my father and I, who I don't talk about as much. I mean, my parents are together and like we're in the same household right now. But like I would laugh whenever he would stumble on his English. And so it's like I used the colonizers' language as a weapon against him. And the only way that he knew how to react, because we couldn't argue in the same language, was that he would resort to the fly swatter.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I was older, and I'm saying in my 20s, where I actually learned about how he was raised and how he was beaten as a child. And now I see that inner child in him, the one that never received that gentle parenting. And I have so much compassion now. I mean, like, granted, he still triggers the shit out of me sometimes, but I also am so grateful that I have better coping skills with discerning what is and what isn't mine, and like knowing when it is to step away. And yeah, it just like begs the question of like, is violence something that is cultural, or is it something that it's learned? And what I'm hearing from you is that if these styles of gentle parenting were actually stolen from us, then what does it look like to be able to reclaim those practices when a lot of us aren't even taught these skills of how to reparent ourselves?
100%. I mean, Latinx parenting, I say it stands on the two legs of parenting and reparenting. It's like you will fall over if you don't stand on one of them, right, as a parent. And so earlier you had said you're not a parent, and I want to reject that. It's like we are all caregivers. We are all caretakers of one another. We all parent each other in one way or another. And we all have an inner child, as you've talked about, so many times, and we've connected on this as well. We are reparenting ourselves constantly. I think that taking it upon ourselves, those of us who are taught that there is shame in having those very factual reflections around what we did not receive, right? There's like in our culture so much rejection of truth, right? Like I had a difficult upbringing for some people. might seem like I am disrespecting my elders, or it may seem like I'm rejecting my culture in one way or another. And so we like conflate all of these things. We conflate culture with the way that we were raised, with everything that's systemic, that's impacting the family. Like all of these things are conflated. And when you are really being brave and acknowledging that you didn't receive what you needed, and you're not afraid of the judgment that comes with that, you can begin to have this really beautiful journey where you nurture that part of yourself that was wounded. And I say this from a place of privilege because I fortunately did not have that immigration experience. I did not have the traumas that my parents experienced. I did not have, I am white passing and presenting, so I didn't have a lot of the racist experiences that my mom did when she first came here as well. So I want to just acknowledge, like, I'm saying this from a place of privilege. And also, my truth is valid, right? Like, I had a really difficult time as a child, and that has bled into my adulthood. And certain things are so much harder for me because those needs were not met. And, I think we need to stop conflating culture and violence. Like, a lot of the people that have said, I'm going to keep using that chancla, or Chancla culture is just our culture. I really reject that, because our culture is not violence. Our culture is beautiful and celebratory and passionate. It is not, it has become, a cultural characteristic of our culture. And at the same time, it does not belong to us, and we do not belong to it. And so that is really the message, right, that I want to tell people. It's like, you have to begin this healing journey knowing, number one, that you are not alone in it. And number two, knowing that in the long run, it is going to be the most beneficial thing for not just you personally during this lifetime, but for your spirit, for your children, for your descendants, for those future ancestors. Like, you are actually not here only belonging to you. Like, we are an organism, right? And so my intention really is to bring healing into the culture.
Yeah. And also, the revolution begins at home. And so we're
Mhm.
seeing an increase in the violence that's happening nationally, to where it's now leaked into our schools, especially our elementary schools. Um, and like, I'm not gonna lie, as soon as I see the news, I dissociate. Even though I'm attentive to what's going on, like, I personally don't like to reshare, because I'm like, okay, if I'm feeling traumatized by the news, then why would I want to perpetuate that as much as I want to keep up with everything that's happening? I just feel like we have become so numb to it. And oftentimes I just feel incredibly helpless. Like, what is my role? And yeah, sure, I can pick up the phone, I could call my politician, I could write letters, but what is our responsibility in contributing to this systemic change of ending violence, when it's like, as parents, you have so much going on? Like, where do we begin?
Yeah, that is the question, right? Like, how do we prevent this from happening? How do we ensure that our children are raised in a way where it would be unimaginable for them to enact this kind of violence? And that is something that I think a lot of us have to sit really long and hard with. Like, what is our role? I can't define that for anybody. And also, as you're talking about just the nervous system activation that happens in your brown body, because so many of us have ancestral, cultural, intergenerational trauma, our bodies are going to react differently to news like this than people who don't have similar traumas. And so, number one is always going to be take care of you, right? Like, make sure that you are feeling safe in your body, because feeling unsafe in those ways is not going to be supportive or productive or allow us to really take those steps forward. So for me in the parenting space, my initial question, which actually got some heat and a lot of people celebrated it and were on the same page as me, but the question I asked was about everything and everyone that might have failed this person who did this awful thing, or everybody who may have failed anybody who's ever done this kind of thing, right? So looking at it from a place of the school that he went to, the family that he grew up in, the messages that he received about himself as a man or as a you know, as a brown man, as a Latino man, for example. We're talking specifically about Uvalde and the shooter. And so I always go to the root, right? Like, what is the root of this particular incident and why is it so shared? So these are conversations on patriarchy, on toxic masculinity, of, you know, the glorifying violence, of mistaken ideas of power, right? There's all kinds of layers here. And so I think me as a mother and other parents, like, we have to really get real about those things. Like, it's really uncomfortable to talk to our children about these things. It's really uncomfortable to call out your son or your partner, right, if they're male identifying, when they're being misogynistic. But these are the things that we have to do if we're going to prevent those things from happening in the future. I don't have an answer about like why this. I think that you know, people are like, why? And I again, like, it's not futile, but I don't necessarily want to focus so much on him. I want to understand what I can do to ensure that my kids are feeling held, that they're feeling like they belong, like they're feeling like they're a part of their community, like they are feeling, you know, in connection and togetherness with others. As much as I can support that, that is what I have to do. Because clearly, when people are doing this, that's not happening for them, right? In the months or years leading up to that. And so that's, I think, what we can do is just like, we need community holding. We need spaces where we can just be, and we are not going to be judged, and we're committing to not judge other people. Like, we need this in every space, right? So we need this in schools, in whatever space he ever occupied. Like, that space should have been one of holding and belonging and community and connection.
Well, and even looking at the ways that our American culture deals with violence and conflict, everything is punitive, from our schools to like the school to prison pipeline. Okay, you get in trouble, what happens? Detention, suspension. You commit a crime, what happens? You get arrested, you get incarcerated, or you get fined. And then how does this leak into our homes? Whenever we make a mistake as children, it tends to be through violence, time out. And I mean, like, I find that this is people's immediate response. Arrest this person, put them behind bars. That kid needs a beating.
Yeah.
And so how is it then that we can actually shift the ways we respond to violence? And I know we're talking a lot about reparenting, but also I'm curious about, like, how is it that you have personally been responding to the pushback? Because I know that there's been a lot of it for you.
Yeah. Honestly, and this, I hope this does not sound patronizing, but there's woundedness at the root of a lot of people's resistance to trying to understand the truth about what's going on, right? Like, I think that there's an invitation for people to be vulnerable. And I think that our culture does not encourage that vulnerability. I think that our society encourages things like pride and, you know, just being right and living in these binary ways, and, you know, seeing everything through the lens of good and bad. And when I reject that, that's when I get the most pushback, right? Like, people are just like, I don't understand. Like, are you saying that this person was good? Like, are you saying that? And it's like, no, what we're trying to do is humanize humans, right? Like, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to humanize the humans so that we can get to the point where needs are met, right, at every level. And for me personally, I've had to do a lot of shadow work. Like, I've had to really look at the ways that I perpetuate Chancla culture or violence, or ways that breed disconnection in my family or in friendships. Like, I've had to get really real and honest, and that's been a painful experience. And so I feel like when people don't want to enter into that journey, I understand it. Like, I get it. Like, this is painful. even admitting that your parents were wrong when they hit you, that can be a painful process for somebody because it means that your parents are fallible and we're not conditioned necessarily to everything's so adult-centered, so parent-centered. Like there is this idea of adult supremacy that is everywhere. And so when you are thinking about your parents in a way that, they're infallible or, related ways, that can be really uncomfortable and painful for some people. And so when I see that pushback, I just need to like send them love and like also understand that they're coming from a place of woundedness and they're not there, but that doesn't mean that they're not there yet.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So I hold out the hope, right? I hold out hope that they will get there.
Yeah. So tell us then about like, how is it that Latinx parenting is helping to shift that culture?
Oh my gosh, so many ways, I hope. I really intend on being, this movement where parents can feel a lot of safety in doing things differently than the way that they were raised. Where a lot of people come to us, and actually it's not just Latinx people that follow Latinx parenting, it's a lot of people from the diaspora who also come from colonized cultures. And so I've had, Filipinx people come up and say, we had Chancla culture too, and that's really beautiful, right? It's what is uniting us. And at the same time, we are centering ourselves as children and the children that we were in order to say we never deserved violence, right? We never deserved disconnection. We never deserved all of these things that brought us pain and struggle and suffering. And so there's so much grief in that. And I feel like that's been a part of the work too. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's painful. It's, I feel very, what's the word that Paulina uses? Griefy. I feel very griefy here. And yeah, so I find that having the platform and having the space and having offerings and workshops and spaces where we can process these things and all of the layers of that, it really offers us the kind of connection I think that we need in order to be able to do that for our kids, right? Like if I'm not feeling connected with by my community, it's going to be extremely difficult for me to hold space for my children because I'm not having that space held for me. So I think that that's how Latinx parenting is really, being that bridge for families to know that they're not alone.
Mm. In this process of learning how to reparent ourselves, a lot of that is going back to look at the ways that our parents maybe haven't received that kind of, well, yeah, of course, they haven't received that kind of parenting. And I see what happens a lot is that, especially children of immigrants feel like they become the parents to their parents while learning how to reclaim that for themselves. But I am really curious about how is it that you have witnessed intergenerational healing play out in your family as you have been embodying this work?
Girl, when you just said that we parent our parents, you hit a nerve in my spirit, in my soul. I'm like, oh, it's that in and of itself, right? Because I feel like the question that you just asked me, I feel like has like 5 petals growing out of it that are just so lovely and beautiful. But I did want to say that that is so accurate that we have to be almost, yeah, like parents, like mothers or fathers, right? If you identify that way. To our parents. And so that can be a very layered process. I think one of the things that happened recently was my mom is very aware that, ending Chancla culture is like what the movement is called. She rocks the tote that I have, like she knows about it. And one of the things that she said to me recently was like, I really wish that I had gotten la chancla because what I received was so much worse, right? And it really cemented this idea. I had been saying this, but I feel like this like really cements the idea that like every generation does a little bit better and does reflect, even in slight ways. I wouldn't say this uniformly for like all families, but I think that the way that I've seen it happen in my family is that, my chancletazos, the violence that I engage in, which I do engage in violence, all of us do, is not physical, right? It's a lot of times it's that verbal, like I'm being really loud right now with my kids. And so I really want to, state that disclaimer that I am not nonviolent. I think I said this in like a newsletter recently, like I can only strive to be nonviolent. but I've seen the healing happen in that my mom actually decided not to do some of the things that her parents did, you know, and there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to our relationship. But I think I'm at the point now where I can really appreciate that she also was a cycle breaker, right? That she also decided that she wanted something better for her children. Even if that was like, for me, I'm just like, that was traumatizing, right? Like even better is like really hard. But I can look at her now and I can also see that inner Nina in her and how hard she tries to feel loved, you know, and to have her experiences held. I don't necessarily know that I'm the person to be able to do that for her because it does feel really heavy, right? And so when she shares like heavy things with me, which she often does now, I have to have really clear like energetic boundaries because I feel responsible for her, right? Like I feel responsible for her now as an elder. And so that, you know, that is something I process in therapy, obviously. But I am able to kind of see her and see her beautiful, you know, child spirit sometimes in the way that she plays with my children. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can see you. Like I can see um, you as a little girl, you know, engaging with my kids in this way and playing with them and laughing. And I just like love her laugh. You know, I feel like I want to just like record her laugh and like play it all the time because I love it so much. And also, I've just seen her go through so much. So I do enter into states where I'm just like so honored to be her daughter. And then sometimes it gets really hard again, right? Like the mother wound is real. The mother wound is super real. And so I address that, right, in the offerings that I have also this very specific wound that we have when it comes to our mothers. But I do ultimately see that there has been generational healing. I don't expect that I'm going to heal my entire lineage in this lifetime. It's just impossible. There's been 500 years of colonization, and I'm going to be here for maybe like 80, 90, 100 years if I'm lucky. So I don't want us to set the expectation for ourselves that like we have this burden on our shoulders of healing all of the ancestral and intergenerational trauma. Like we are just here to do what we can and to be in joy as much as we can. And just that is going to break some of those cycles of violence and pain.
Yeah. And then also on the other side, so there's the healing that's happening between you and your mother, but you're also raising these future ancestors. And in talking about, is it like adultism, ageism? It's like, oh, because I am an adult, I have the authority versus seeing these people, these little people as our teachers, while balancing what does it look like to ensure that we are prepping them to help us co-create a more equitable and loving world. And so what is it that you feel your children have taught you about being a better person, a parent, and also like when you see them, like what does it mean for you to be raising future ancestors?
Oh my gosh, it's everything. It's just like there's so many ways that I can answer that because whenever I do presentations or workshop, it's like, hey, these are my teachers. And I do share like my elders and I share my coaches and I share, you know, all kinds of people that I've learned from, including my ancestors. But then I share a picture of my children and I'm like, these are actually my greatest teachers. These are the ones that humble the shit out of me every single day. Like I know nothing except for what these children teach me, right? Like it is so challenging to be in alignment, not having had a blueprint for what it looks like to be in constant connection with children. It is so complex. Like, so it's just, there's so much to it. And also, I find that I learn the most when I'm allowing myself and my inner child to play with them, you know, and to just be in present space with them. It's hard, but when I enter that space, it's just, I feel like I'm at church, right? I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you're magical. And yes, I want to, you know, sometimes I'm too tired and I don't necessarily want to play, but when I'm able to, like yesterday, my daughter and I were driving home and she's really into like the word aesthetic. Like, I don't know why, but like she's 10 years old and she loves the word aesthetic. And she like, I was like, play some music. And she like, went on Spotify and typed in aesthetic music. And so it was really funny because she's been really into that word. And we exited the freeway and right next to us was a truck. And on it, it said the word aesthetic. And she's been talking about this for so long. And so she was like, look, it says aesthetic. And I was like, that's so weird because you never see that word written anywhere. And so in that time, I was like, what do you think about this? Right? That you've been really like, she's manifesting this word coming to her. And so we're able to have those points of connection now where I'm able to talk to her about manifestation, right? I'm able to tell her, she was like, oh my gosh, like I got sat at the table that I really, really hoped that I wouldn't get sat at with the people that I didn't want to get sat next to. And I was like, congratulations, you manifested this, right? And so not to be like patronizing to her at all or whatever, but I want them to know how powerful they are. And I think that they teach me how powerful I am, right? Like how like I have capacity for creativity and making those things happen. And so they just remind me of that. And they remind me of my sacredness and they remind me of my innocence. And they remind me of the fact that I am still this little girl and that I'm honoring her always. And so that is how I think that they are my greatest teachers because I am them.
Have you gotten her to take notice of angel numbers like, hey, 222-444-777?
We do. Right now, 1111 is like what
Yeah.
she, will look to notice. But we made her altar together. She has oracle cards. Like we have, specific stones and candles that she's placed on her altar. And so she has watched me do my altar work and sat with me. And I don't let anybody put anything on my altar. My husband like left keys on it the other day, and I was like, no, like this is. But what I do ask is that my children bring me flowers, right? So constantly my kids will go out into the garden and like find, it's like mostly weeds at this point right now, but they'll be like, mommy, and I'll be like, go put it on my altar, and so they have this like model of like what it is to have this sacred space. And that is honestly what I hope for them because I don't ever feel alone in that space, right? And so even if I am not with them, if I die tomorrow, like I want them to feel connection to something bigger than them. And I'm not going to raise them Catholic the way that I was raised. Like I don't want them to enter into, binaries through the dogma of religion. Like I don't want that, but I do want them to have a sense of themselves and their spirituality. And what's awesome is that they teach me how to do that too, right? Just by being present.
And can we just say these Disney movies that be coming out, like Coco and Encanto? I mean, I see a lot of debate like, man, Disney's capitalizing on our culture. And then also I'm like, whoa, there is a collective shift that's happening because I feel like when both you and I stepped into this work, it's like we created the very thing it is that we needed to see. Like in the coaching space, it was predominantly white. People that were much older that had a lot more financial capital to be able to start. And now I'm just like, wow, like I just wanted to call for the other people that I can play with, my own inner child that was merging with this identity of a CEO while embracing the complexities of like charging for my medicine because I want to break the cycle of feeling like my whole life needs to be in struggle. Like we can change that. And the next thing I
Yes.
know, these Disney movies come out. I'm like, hold up. Did they like
I
watch some of
know.
my work? What's going on?
It's been really beautiful. Like it's just been very exciting, I think, to watch this cultural change happen. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, now all of a sudden, like there's all these other people who are like, how, like, do you actually do the work? Or are you just like on this train, right? Like I've been doing this for 14 years and people are now suddenly like inspired. No shade to anybody, but I'm quoting, using air quotes when I say inspired. But for me, I have to honor my teachers. These are not new concepts. These are things that people have been talking about since before I was even born. And so I think as long as we are giving credit where credit is due, right? I think Encanto did a really, really beautiful job of honoring Colombian culture, the music, the way, like I watched the making of it. I've been obsessed with it forever. It's been like a couple weeks that I haven't watched it and it feels like too long. But I really do appreciate that these stories are being told and that we are finally being seen in this way. I really fight against the media representation of Latinx families, because what we see is comedians and people making reels and TikTok and content on social media addressing Latinx families as violent, right? And just saying like, this is how I was raised. And so I want to name that that's trauma bonding when we are like making funny videos and, you know, you have like all these people like resonating with these like funny videos of violence and like hitting kids. I just want to name like, you are trauma bonding. Um, and that's sad. And also I do see the shift happening and it's slow and I may die before it fully, you know, manifests, but I know that I'm a part of it. And that's honestly all I can ask for.
And I can already see you on the altar of so many of the future generations. And so I am curious, while you are still here in this body, in this lifetime, what is it that, what are some of the things that you are doing to continuously reparent yourself? And then also, what are the things that you've had to learn to release?
Oh my gosh, these questions are just such fire. I just want to like appreciate how good these questions are. Um, One of the things I want to start with what I'm releasing, right? I feel like it's helpful to like trim the brown leaves off of the plants, like I did yesterday here.
Yeah.
I think I'm releasing a lot of guilt. I feel like that's the hardest. Like I have really high standards for myself and the way that I show up in the world. And I have a lot of guilt when I'm not meeting my own standards of it, right? And I think part of it's like I'm a Virgo and part of it is how I was raised. And I had to be this like really, you know, clean cut Catholic girl and like no hair out of place and how beautiful I was, that I was white presenting and how, you know, like all of these things that my parents felt gave me value are not truly what gives me value. And so I'm still unlearning all of that, right? And I'm shedding the guilt around not being who I think I should be in any given moment or what I think I should be doing in any given moment, because the standards are really high that I've set, that a lot of us, I think, have set for ourselves. And so what I'm shedding is guilt and shame, right? Constantly shedding guilt and shame. I don't think I'm there yet where I know exactly how to do that, but we're working, we're working on it. Yeah. And I think what was your other question?
Yeah. So like what are some of the things, or like a ritual, a practice,
Yeah.
words of wisdom that you share for yourself whenever you find that you actually have to be in the practice of reparenting you? And especially like, when does that show up?
Hmm. For me, honestly, the catalyst was like my becoming pregnant with my child, right? I was like, before that, I was very carefree. I got in connection with a woman named Sylvia Poero who runs circles, conscious mothering circles. And she was actually the one that introduced me to things like oracle cards and in actually holding a doll that represents you as a child, right? And so she has this really beautiful way of illustrating what we do when we are dependent or codependent or just like placing our well-being in the hands of other people. When those people cannot possibly offer us our full joy and happiness, right? Like so much of that expectation on other people to like be the thing that heals us and be the thing that soothes my inner niña, like that is not how it works. And so she's given me practices like actually holding a doll, right? And just like really loving on little Prissy, my inner niña's name. I think writing has been so big for me, right? Like I constantly write from the perspective of my grandmothers. Like, I don't know if that's like weird or whatever, but I write to myself from my grandmothers and I genuinely feel like they are writing through me to me, right? And so the things that I need to hear are coming from this ancestral guidance. And that's a part of the reparenting journey also that I think often gets neglected, especially in white wellness spaces. It's like you also have to have this like very concrete way to move towards that vision of yourself. And that has to be guided by something that is not physical, right? Like you have to be guided by something that is tangible to you, but not necessarily physical. And so part of the practice that I have learned is to really call in my ancestors, right? And to really connect with this bigger version of myself, right? What a lot of people call the higher self, or what I call like my future abuelita self, like your future ancestor self, right? I think that if we can tap into that version of ourselves, it's going to offer us like such a clear vision for how to move forward. But because we're all caught up in like the heady space and like all the shit, right? It gets really hard and foggy to move towards that version of ourselves. And so I think for me, it's been a lot of ancestor work at my altar. It's been using guidance from my oracle cards. It's been spending time as much as I can outside. The weather is beautiful where we live. Like, you know, I love being at the ocean, wherever I can find like trees. Also, I'm like, okay, I'm safe here, right? So spending our time in nature and really doing that inner Nia work. So I'm holding this version of myself in love, in honoring, and knowing, you know, that she's safe.
You make me want to go and hug my pet sloth, my stuffed
Oh,
sloth. Yeah, that was a practice that was given to me, especially when I came out of my relationship, because I was like, oh my God, like I don't have anybody to hold or nobody to hold me. And my pet sloth, my stuffed sloth has been such a healing tool for me. And yes, it is absolutely weird and strange that you write letters from the perspective of your grandmother, because you know, like this is a part of the decolonization process, right? Like the things that we do, like having an altar, having cards, like having a stuffed animal as an adult is going to be seen as quote unquote weird, but
right.
it is also that process of reclamation. And so this leads me to my last question, which is my favorite. Um, so speaking of ancestors, envisioning yourself now at
Mm.
the altar of the future generation, what is it that you would say to yourself and also to the next generation of future ancestors?
I think the word that comes up for me so much when I ask myself that question or similar ones is patience. Like, I think that we are so impatient with our journeys and our process. And I would just want to encourage people and myself, right? Like, this is me talking to me,
Mhm.
to be patient with the process and to not rush things. This is also me as a manifester, right? Where I'm just like, I just want it now. I want this vision now. And the now is okay, just being the now. Right. And so I would just want to encourage a lot of patience with ourselves, with our children. Obviously, like I have to say that, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
please be patient with them, with their journeys, and to find community around, you know, whatever your intentions are, whatever your visions are.
And remembering that this work is like this vision, this grand vision, may not be met in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
This is a
Yeah.
continuation. This is the legacy. That's exactly uh, what Latinx parenting is. Like when I see it, like, yes, Leslie is the founder of Latinx Parenting, but what I think is so beautiful about what it is you've created is that it's not yours. It truly does belong to the people. And I feel like you embody that so beautifully. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so endlessly inspired by the ways you just continue to show up and be a stand for this message in spite of the limiting beliefs, the doubt, the criticism, because you know that it's so much greater than you. And even though I'm not Latinx, I still feel very much a part of it. And so thank you for continuing to do the work to make your ancestors proud. So
Thank you, June.
for for anybody else who wants to go beyond just following your Instagram page to carry on this legacy, what does that look like? Tell us about the upcoming offerings, as well as like what it is you're working on.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So it's June right now, and we have the LGBTQ Familia series, which is going to be free to anybody to attend. So we're really trying to amplify the stories of people who identify as both Latinx and are, you know, a part of the LGBTQIA community. And so that's going to be at the very end of this month. If people want to check out our links page, you can go to our Instagram and find it from there, or it's just latinxparenting.org/links. And then just after that, in July, we're going to have an intro to decolonized nonviolent parenting. And so that's where really I give the framework for how to begin going about raising your children in a way that is decolonized and that is nonviolent. And so there's so much that is to come after that. We have membership, we have ways to partner with us. And so I just recommend people check out our website, check out our content on Instagram, and share it when it resonates.
I love you so much.
I love you. Where would I be without you? I don't even want to know. I don't want to know the answer to that.
I mean, likewise, I have no idea, but you know what? To many lifetimes to come, if this one isn't our last one, and to many lifetimes before. So celebrating our reunion and how we get to continue traversing this journey of embodying ourselves as future ancestors.
Absolutely. Love you.